Larkin Rose here. In the wake of the new HBO series titled The Anarchists, I thought it was time I made a video that just defines and describes what anarchy and anarchist actually mean. I'll start with the simple definition, which is really all you need, but then I'll get into why there's so much misunderstanding and confusion, and why there are different groups and factions saying, those aren't real anarchists, we're the real anarchists. Politically speaking, anarchy doesn't mean chaos and mayhem. It's a simple word with a simple meaning. The archy part refers to authoritarian domination and ruling. So, for example, monarchy means rule by one person. Oligarchy means rule by a small group of people. And anarchy literally just means rule by no one. And that's all it means. It describes a society without a ruling class, and that's all. It doesn't mean no cooperation. It doesn't mean no organization. It doesn't mean every man for himself. It doesn't mean everybody living like cavemen. It means rule by no one, and that's all that it means. And the word anarchist just means somebody who advocates anarchy. So to be an anarchist means you don't want there to be a ruling class, and that's all that it means. Now, there is a separate definition of the word anarchy, which does mean chaos and mayhem. Now, I know many thousands of anarchists myself. None of them want chaos and mayhem. But think about that for a second. Who benefits from there being one word that means no rulers and also means chaos and mayhem? People who want to rule, maybe? They want us to associate a lack of authoritarian domination with chaos and mayhem, which is pretty damn ironic given that the vast majority of chaos and mayhem and violence and destruction and oppression and war and genocide and so on throughout history have been a direct result of authoritarian power or government. So no, despite the dishonest way that the media always portrays it, anarchist does not mean that you're a Molotov cocktail throwing punk who just loves violence. It has exactly nothing to do with that. It means not wanting a ruling class, and that's all that it means. I, for example, am an anarchist because I don't think there should be a ruling class. I prefer the term voluntarist because it's more specific and more precise. It means I think that all human interaction ideally should be based on voluntary consent, not coercion and violence. And since government is always about forcibly robbing and controlling people, I oppose all governments. But this video is about the word anarchy, not voluntarism, so we'll get back to that. Now, on top of the problem of so many people assuming that anarchists must be in favor of chaos and mayhem, a bunch of people who call themselves anarchists insist that the term also means no hierarchies, even voluntary hierarchies, and no money, and no property, and mutual aid societies, and living in communes, and having the workers own the means of production, and so on and so forth. But since the word literally just means rule by no one, why would anyone claim any of the rest of that? Well, historically, a lot of self-described anarchists have been communists. And now the so-called anarcho-communists, which I am not, by the way, are bitter about anyone else using the word anarchist to describe themselves, particularly those of us who believe in legitimate property ownership and economic trade and using mediums of exchange and having voluntary hierarchies and so on. So the anarcho-commies insist that we're not real anarchists But that's just because they don't know how words work. As an analogy, suppose there was a group of outspoken atheists, people who don't believe in God, who met every Tuesday night to play chess while wearing outlandish purple hats. And later, along came some other people who also didn't believe in God, and so they wanted to call themselves atheists too. But then the first group had an emotional tantrum and said, no. To be a real atheist, you have to meet every Tuesday to play chess while wearing outlandish purple hats, because we were here first. And historically, atheist has always meant those of us who don't believe in God and meet every Tuesday night to play chess while wearing outlandish purple hats. That ridiculous analogy is the equivalent of what anarcho-communists do when they insist that they are the real anarchists because they've decided to just tack on whatever arbitrary hodgepodge of communist dogma they want to and pretend that somehow the word anarchist now means all that other random, irrelevant stuff too. But it doesn't. It means someone who opposes the existence of a ruling class, and that's all. Now, it would be bad enough if they just wanted to tack on a bunch of extra meanings of things they happen to like and pretend that the word anarchist has to mean all that stuff too. But the anarcho-communists are worse than that, and here's why. To be an anarchist means you oppose the existence of a ruling class, and that's all that it means. Theoretically, one could be a serial killer, cannibal, psychopath and be an anarchist if they oppose the existence of a ruling class. Or they could be a pacifist, hippie hermit living in a yurt in the jungle and be an anarchist if they oppose the existence of a ruling class. Someone could believe 1,000 different things and still be an anarchist if they oppose the existence of a ruling class. Again, this is why I prefer the term voluntarist, because instead of just saying what shouldn't be, namely a ruling class, it says what should be, namely a society based on voluntary cooperation and organization. So you can believe literally anything else and still be an anarchist if and only if you oppose the existence of a ruling class. But here's the problem. In the society that anarcho-communists advocate, there's no money, there's no property ownership, there are no hierarchies, even voluntary ones. So what happens if other people, like me and the people I know, for example, want to trade and want to use mediums of exchange and want to form organizations that have voluntary hierarchies and so on? Are the anarcho-communists okay with that? Well, no. Any such behavior, if not approved by the Central Committee of the Collective, must be stamped out. Because after all, according to their delusions, rent is theft and wages are slavery and property is theft and lots of other BS slogans that the commies like to spew out. And we need to take everybody's money and redistribute all the wealth and make sure everyone has what they need and so on and so forth. Giant central master plan. But aside from how completely wrong the commies are on all those issues, did you notice a more fundamental problem? If you have some central authority dictating how everyone must behave, especially when it comes to economic matters, that is a government. That is a ruling class. And anyone who advocates that is, by definition, not an anarchist. Calling your ruling class a collective committee of the people or whatever doesn't make it not a ruling class. Now, by the way, if you want to see how this philosophy plays out in the real world, read up on the Soviet Union or Communist China under Mao Zedong or North Korea, because they all used such terminology. They all instituted centralized authoritarian collectivist control in the name of communism or socialism and equality and fairness and the people and the common good and yada, yada, yada. And they all ended up being brutal authoritarian dictatorships. So, not only are anarcho-communists confused and wrong about all sorts of things, and not only are they not the only real anarchists, they're not anarchists at all. They advocate the existence of a ruling class, they just don't call it government. Now, if someone would choose a communal arrangement for himself without trying to impose that on everyone else, he could still be an anarchist. But having talked to plenty of them, I can tell you that most anarcho-communists absolutely want their economic preferences forced onto everyone else. You don't have to believe everything I believe in order to be an anarchist. For me to claim otherwise would be ridiculous. You don't have to have all the same priorities and preference and values that I do in order to be an anarchist. All you have to do is oppose the existence of a ruling class. Period. If some people want to go have a commune where they share everything they grow and don't use any mediums of exchange and have no one in charge of anything, I would never try to stop them. Now, human nature and the laws of economics might smack them down, as it often has to such endeavors in the past, but I would never try to forcibly stop anything anyone else wanted to try, as long as it's based on mutual consent and voluntary interaction. 1,000 groups of people can try 1,000 different ways of arranging and organizing things, and I will interfere with none of them if they're not initiating violence against anyone else. That is what actual tolerance looks like. If some people want to live very primitively off in nature somewhere, have at it. If other people like technology and like having a very sophisticated and specialized economy, no problem. Mind your own business. Don't try to rule me or anyone else, and don't violate other people's consent. Don't take their stuff or commit aggression against them. And you never have to worry about me trying to forcibly inject my beliefs and preferences into your life. The vast majority of anarcho-communists that I've talked to cannot say the same, because they're not actually anarchists. As an aside, being a voluntarist does not mean being a pacifist, although you can be that too if you want. The vast majority of voluntarists I know are quite able and willing to use brute force, if necessary, to stop someone from assaulting or victimizing someone else. Advocating a society based on mutual consent and voluntary cooperation does not mean expecting everyone to be peaceful, moral, and civilized. When someone does commit aggression, their intended victims or anyone and everyone else have the right to use whatever force necessary to stop that aggression and protect the innocent. Oh, and by the way, claiming to be authority and calling your aggression law doesn't make it moral, and it doesn't change the fact that people have the right to defend themselves by force, if necessary, from anyone who tries to initiate violence against them, including aggressors with badges. To oversimplify a bit, people who call themselves anarchists usually fit more or less into one of two categories. Anarcho-communists, who aren't actually anarchists for the reasons I already explained, and anarcho-capitalists. Now, I don't particularly like the term anarcho-capitalist, even though I basically am one, only because these days so many people, when they hear the word capitalism, they think of the corporate fascism we have today, where government and big business cooperate to coercively dominate everyone and everything else. Now, that's not what capitalism actually means. It literally means economic ownership and trade that is not controlled by government. In other words, nothing like what we have right now. But we'll save arguing over that term for another discussion. To me, if anything, the term anarcho-capitalism is redundant. It basically means I don't want there to be a government, and I don't want government interfering when it comes to ownership and trade. Well, if I don't want government to exist at all, then obviously I don't want it meddling in the economy. Now, bizarrely, some left-leaning anarchists openly call for a huge welfare state and demand that government give away all sorts of free stuff to everyone. So, consistency and logic are not their strong suits. Your body, your time, and your effort belong to you. If you make something yourself, it belongs to you, and no one should take it from you without your consent. If you choose to voluntarily give what is yours to someone else, that can be generous and charitable, but it must be your choice whether to do that, not the choice of any government and not the choice of any collective. And if you decide to trade what is yours, your labor or something you produced or built, for something that someone else has, and both sides agree, no one else has the right to forcibly interfere with that. Again, there are thousands of ways that people can voluntarily choose to trade and interact, and I would forcibly interfere with exactly none of them. And I wouldn't vote for any king, any central committee, any government, anything to forcibly interfere on my behalf, because I'm an anarchist, and more specifically, a voluntarist. As it happens, I became an anarchist not because I decided it would work better than having a government, but because I accidentally figured out that it is logically impossible for any government, any ruling class, to be moral or legitimate. And because I therefore oppose the existence of any ruling class, I am, by definition, a real anarchist. By the way, if you want to know why voluntarism is the only moral and sane political position, and it's actually anti-political, then I suggest that you read my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition.